Chapter 2, Monday, 1:20 a.m. Payoffs. When Tom crashed out the house's back door, my ears were still ringing from the shot, or, hopefully, shots. I expected to see lights turning on and people coming out of their homes, but it was as quiet and dark as when Tom found the back door unlocked. He ran through the backyard, vaulted the low fence into another yard, and didn't slow down until he reached the sidewalk in front of the house. Off in the distance, a siren wailed its warning. Tom looked around, forcing himself to walk. Light from late-night TV flickered from neighboring houses. He passed a window where a man in his underwear stood in front of an open refrigerator. When Tom reached the car, I saw he wanted to rip off the mask. Not yet, I thought, and sighed with relief when his hand went to the car door instead. He slid behind the wheel and gently shut the car door. Tom had complained loudly about the stale smell of the fast food containers tossed into the back seat on the drive over, and wanted to stop to clean it. I convinced him that few car thieves clean out the cars they steal. Now he was breathing air laden with the odors of greasy wrappings, old French fries, and half-empty condiments through the layer of fear-infused, sweat-soaked balaclava. Panicked, he slapped a hand over his mouth, and I watched him force down the bile surging up his throat. Pushing the clammy, wet wool harder into his nose and mouth made it worse. He bent over the steering wheel, clenching his jaw so tight I worried he might break a molar. Just when I was convinced he would be sitting alone in a car when the police arrived, he sat up and drove slowly down the street. He went for 2 blocks before I decided to hell with the rule. You might want to pick it up a little. I can walk faster than this. So, no, you don't want to speed, but you also don't want to look like you're casing the neighborhood, I said. Thought we agreed you'd butt out, he replied. I didn't answer, and 30 minutes later he stopped at a park by the river. Ducking his head, he pulled off the mask soaked with his DNA. Tom put the mask into a large garbage bag, careful not to let it touch anything. Then he put on a wig, a baseball cap, and large black-framed reading glasses. Raising his head, he said, "This feels silly. No one else is in the park." I didn't answer. It would look even sillier if Tom sat in the car talking to himself. At night, the park looked different. It was probably the kind of place Kaufman often drove to, using his own car, before pulling out a small body to casually toss into the river. I told myself to calm down. The worst part was over. Tom eased the old Colt Auto out of his pocket and carefully ejected the clip. He stared at the clip for a long time, trying to count the number of rounds left. But it was too dark to see the unspent rounds, because Tom had broken the dome roof light so the car would not light up when the doors opened. He carefully slid the bullets out of the clip, counting each out loud as he placed them back into the box of shells. A clip holds 7, and there were 4 left. That meant he shot the old shit 3 times. Then Tom remembered the one in the chamber and sighed with relief. He had only fired 2 shots, just as planned. Ejecting the round in the chamber, he watched as it fell to the floor and disappeared. I wondered if this was how we would get caught. Finally, he found the errant round and carefully put it in the box. Tom told himself and me that the fat man was dead. No one gets shot twice in the head and survives. I broke the silence to remind him that he was wasting time. I had ignored him, so he ignored me as he added the box of shells and the old pistol to the garbage bag. Stepping out of the car, he paused to recheck the street. Still no cars. I chose this location because the freeway, built long after the park, made it so dangerous to get to it by foot that even the homeless avoided it. Tom peered into the shadows for a long time before hoisting the garbage bag and walking to the river. He removed the wig, baseball cap, and reading glasses at the riverbank and set them carefully down on the grass. Then he pulled off his sweatshirt and pants and added them to the garbage bag. Finally, he pulled off the gloves, ensuring that his hands did not touch the outside of the gloves. We weren't sure how gunpowder residue transfers, but why take chances? I thought of another residue of sorts, sweat laced with DNA, that Tom had sprinkled liberally over Kaufman's bedroom. It was too late to worry about it, and as far as I knew, Tom's DNA had never been cataloged. Tom shivered in the running suit he wore beneath the sweats from the cold wind that blew off the water. He picked it up, and once again, I broke our agreement. "Don't forget to poke holes in the bag," I said. Tom nodded and used his folding knife to slash holes. Then he used both hands to toss it as far out as possible into the river. The current was swift, which is another reason I picked this location. The bag seemed to float on the surface for a moment, and we both sucked in our breath. Then it disappeared in the moonlight. He threw the box of bullets far past the bag and turned before the box hit the water. I watched as he forced himself to walk back to the car. I was about to speak when he remembered his disguise lying on the grass. Shaking his head, he retrieved everything, putting it back on as he walked to the car. Later, Tom drove down a quiet street from an apartment complex crammed into an old neighborhood. The complex didn't have enough parking for its residents, which meant the cars from their roommates, lovers, and drunk friends spilled onto the streets of the surrounding neighborhoods every night. I had watched a young hipster get this spot at the same time every afternoon and leave it there until the following day. We both breathed a sigh of relief when we saw that no one had taken the parking spot. It hadn't been essential, of course. All that mattered was that the car be somewhere on the street where the guy would find it sooner or later. Tom wasn't worried about the police finding it, even if its owner reported it stolen. As he got out of the car, Tom saw the hipster, plaid shirt, stocking cap, and scraggly beard, purposefully heading for him. Tom and I had agreed it was best for the car to end up back where we got it, and we had discussed this contingency. Tom pretended to tie his shoe, and I knew he was telling himself not to get into a fight. Just knock him off his feet and run like hell. There was no way the kid would chase him, we hoped. Footsteps echoed on the pavement. Tom braced himself to lunge upward, hoping the wig stayed in place. "Evening," the hipster said with a drunk's careful pronunciation, and kept walking to a car down the street. Tom straightened and watched the hipster fumble with a car door before tumbling into the driver's side and driving away. I grinned ruefully, thinking that no one could tell these guys apart. They were better disguised than Tom. I thought about calling 911 to report the drunk bastard and reluctantly decided against it. There are limits to criminal life that I never imagined. Tucking his disguise inside his running jacket, Tom jogged to his house, only 4 miles away. But in a world where people run at night and not for exercise, it was possibly the most dangerous part of the night. Walking into his kitchen through the side door, Tom seemed confused. His life was forever changed, yet everything in the kitchen was the same. The loaf of wheat bread still sat next to a bowl of tomatoes on the counter. Even the crumbs on the counter were still there. Automatically, Tom opened the refrigerator and reached inside for a beer. He took a long swallow, stepped to the kitchen table, and sat in front of a computer display. I checked that no one was or had been on his computer. Even the best hackers leave digital DNA if you know where to look. His system was clean. I nodded with satisfaction. The usual suspects in his neighborhood were DEA wiretaps, which collected terabytes of data rarely used for anything other than justifying increased budgets. For all practical purposes, those guys left business cards taped onto whatever they touched. "You're clean," I said. With a grunt of disgust, dusted with relief, Tom pulled up a satellite image of St. Louis with small colored dots moving about it. He frowned. Something was wrong. Kaufman's house should be surrounded by dots. Tom zoomed in, but nothing. We located the marshals. Their vehicles were where they usually were this time of night, at home. Tom sat back, finished the beer, and got another one. The plan was to tell Kaufman that the marshals were never coming, no matter how many times Kaufman pushed the panic button inside that drawer. I had hacked a delay into the panic button. We had wanted Kaufman to feel the despair his victims felt in their last moments, to know their hopelessness because no one was coming to their rescue. Tom had pulled the trigger too fast. His face creased with worry. I said, "Tom, you killed him. There is only one way to find out for sure. Go ahead, do it." Tom typed a command, and the marshals got the emergency signal from Kaufman. The closest marshal was 15 minutes away. Tom leaned forward and forgot his beer. Nothing happened. 5 minutes went by, and then 10. 20 minutes later, I considered sending the signal again. Then a marshal dot moved. The guy was in no hurry. The dot even stopped at a gas station before moving to the front of Kaufman's house, a full 22 minutes later. Tom shook his head and took a sip of warm beer. Finally, the other Marshall dots moved. Fuck. They also headed to Kaufman's house. We hoped they'd go to the witnesses they were supposed to protect. But protection is a daily grind, and a manhunt is a manhunt. We had sent the panic button almost an hour ago. What were they thinking? His killer stuck around to make a sandwich? It hadn't gone as well as we planned, but it easily might have gone much worse. Tom got a fresh beer while I checked to make sure his computer was still clean. "You're still good," I said. Tom yawned and made the call using his computer. I was not surprised when it wasn't answered until the fifth ring. After all, it was almost 3 a.m, but the man answering was not a U.S. Marshal. Torrentero was a night owl. The life does that to you. "Yeah?" The voice didn't sound groggy, but it did sound like it was coming from a speaker. I checked. "Yeah, the phone is on speaker, but the room seems empty." "Keep going," I told Tom. Nodding, Tom told Torrentero, "Kaufman's dead." "Who's this?" "The guy who sent you the phone you're holding in the instructions." "Hold on a sec." We watched Torrentero sit down and set the phone on a desk, adjusting it, so the phone speaker was next to a recorder. Crude and limited, but it worked. If the man cared about it, he would have disabled the phone's speaker capability. The guy was actually pretty bright. He taped over the camera lenses. He never looked for the hidden lenses embedded in the phone display. "You're Horn, the guy who hit Morris a couple months ago?" Torrentero asked casually. Tom shook his head in disgust at the transparent effort. He glanced over at a glass-framed photograph facing him on the table. The reflection in the glass sneered back. "Morris was killed by whoever broke into his house and tore it apart. Taking credit and money for the hit was a shot in the dark that worked better than we ever expected. There was no chance in hell that the guys who killed Morris would ever get caught. The downside was that in the unlikely event they did, Torrentero's recording might save them. And sooner or later, Torrentero will get jammed up and use the recording. The two guys will probably be serving time for something else by that time. Damn it, Tom. Focus, I thought. "I got Morris and everything else," Tom typed. It was good thinking. Guys like Torrentero live in fear of their subordinates stashing evidence to use against them. Tom was making Horn sound like a true professional. "Good for you, Horn. What do you want?" Torrentero replied dryly. "Mr. Torrentero, I want you to follow my instructions." Torrentero said for the record, "First of all, I'm a businessman. I didn't care if the feds put that sick bastard Kaufman on the stand. There isn't a jury in the world who'd believe that asshole. After my lawyers got through with him, the judge would have to call a recess so everyone can go home and take a hot shower. You didn't do me a fucking favor. And trust me, I'll track you down sooner or later." Horn said, "I wasn't asking to get paid for Kaufman. Your fee is so that I don't kill you. Kaufman was a nice way to prove I can do it any time I want. This, by the way, is strictly between us. It was all explained in the instructions I sent to you." Torrentero let the silence drag on. Some guys would take it personally. Not him. He liked the play Horn was making, even if it was nothing more than the last card to play when everything went to shit. No one in the know would believe for a single second that Torrentero would pay Horn not to kill him. What they would remember is that Kaufman wouldn't be testifying. Despite his little speech for the record, the fact is that not only would a jury believe Kaufman, they'd eat it up. Juries love wise guys. Witsec wouldn't exist otherwise. What Torrentero didn't like was how much he would pay Horn. It was several times over the amount of the contract he put out on Kaufman. He definitely didn't want that part to get out. "Well, hell, that's very frightening, Mr. Horn, and a lot of money," Torrentero said calmly. "Why would I make you an enemy?" "That is a very good point," Torrentero said, each word dripping with unfeigned menace. "Mr. Torrentero, just follow the instructions, all of the instructions, and our business is concluded," Tom replied. "Horn, this is over. Am I clear?" "Sir, it's over when you complete the instructions." Tom hit a key and watched Torrentero glare down at the phone. Torrentero stepped out of view and came back with a paper-wrapped box. I wondered if Torrentero would open it. Torrentero wondered the same thing. The instructions were clear. Send funds to an account and pass on the package to the person on the text. The package looked exactly like the one he received a couple months ago from Gorbin. It was a clever move. A little too clever as far as he was concerned. However, the surprise was who Horn wanted the package sent to: Frank Dragna. Frank Dragna was the flip side to Bugsy Siegel, who created Las Vegas in the 1940s, before his investors gunned him down in his girlfriend's house in Beverly Hills. Siegel was a high school dropout. Dragna was a Harvard-educated venture capital guru who enjoyed playing the gangster. Only the feds didn't think he was playing, nor did Torrentero. What surprised me was that the feds never found anyone who could testify against Dragna. Dragna hadn't come up in the life like Torrentero and Gorbin. Dragna had his own business model, and no one in the life had any idea what the hell it was. But with Craig Nickey as his right-hand man, Dragna was not someone to take lightly. The rest of it didn't matter. The feds were clueless about Dragna, and all Horn did was link Gorbin to him, then him to Dragna, all based on WITSEC witnesses. So what? Gorbin's lawyers and his would say the feds can't use it. Dragna's lawyers would tell him the same thing. Let Horn build his brand on WITSEC's failure to protect their witnesses. The feds see Torrentero, Gorbin, and Dragna as apex predators. It's not that they won't turn on each other, but they kept too many layers between them for their testimony to be useful. For decades, the feds have used WITSEC to pry those layers apart. Horn might change that game. Torrentero turned away from the phone, and we heard keystrokes. After the funds showed up in the account, we watched as the phone made its way to a garage. Torrentero's money was already in cryptocurrency when we watched the head of a hammer descend, and the screen went blank. "Tell me again why we are doing this," Tom said. "You know why. What are we supposed to do when we come across a guy like Kaufman?" I replied. "Not that part. The money. Why do we need money?" Tom asked in a tired voice. "We do it this way so that no one gets blamed for what we did. That would be too hard to live with. Look, we have to be at work in a couple of hours," Tom said. "Yeah, like we have so much time," I replied.